Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Reconstruction-era Tennessee. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. Between January and August of 1872, the city of Memphis became a hunting ground for a woman the newspapers would name the Black Widow. 7 high-ranking leaders of the Ku Klux Klan were discovered dead in their beds, each with their throat methodically cut from ear to ear. Every victim had been seen in the company of the same mysterious mulatto woman in the days preceding their murder. The killings were executed with such precision that investigators found no signs of struggle, only the bodies of powerful men who had welcomed their killer into their most private chambers. The first discovery came on the morning of January 15, 1872, when Colonel James Whitmore's housekeeper, a widow named Mrs. Sarah Hendricks, arrived at his townhouse on Adams Avenue to prepare breakfast. She found the front door unlocked, which struck her as unusual given the colonel's military precision in all matters of household security. Upon entering the master bedroom on the second floor, Mrs. Hendricks discovered her employer lying peacefully in his bed, the white linen sheets soaked crimson with blood that had pooled beneath his neck. The wound across his throat was so deep and clean that the attending physician, Dr. Marcus Webb, would later note in his official report that it appeared to have been made by someone with surgical knowledge, executed in a single, practiced motion while the victim slept. What made the scene particularly disturbing was its undisturbed nature. The room showed no evidence of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no defensive wounds on the colonel's hands, nothing to suggest he had awakened or resisted his killer. Mrs. Hendricks, still trembling when questioned by police that afternoon, reported seeing a woman leaving through the back entrance as dawn broke. A beautiful mulatto woman wearing an elegant burgundy dress and a veiled hat, who moved with unhurried grace down the alley toward Beale Street. The city's initial shock over Colonel Whitmore's death transformed into collective terror when Judge Herbert Thornton was found murdered in his mansion on Court Avenue on March 3, 1872. The discovery followed an eerily familiar pattern. The judge lay in his bed with his throat cut so precisely that the wound appeared almost surgical in its execution, the room undisturbed save for the violence inflicted upon his person. His wife, who had been visiting relatives in Nashville, returned to find her husband's body already cold, the bedsheets stained dark with blood that had ceased flowing hours before. Less than 2 weeks later, on March 16th, businessman Edward Chambers met the same fate in his residence near the Cotton Exchange, where he had built his fortune financing agricultural operations across the Mid-South. Chambers' valet, upon bringing morning coffee, found his employer in a state identical to the previous victims, throat severed, no signs of struggle, the bedroom door locked from the inside with the key still in place. What united these deaths beyond their gruesome similarity was the emergence of a pattern that Memphis Police Chief William Hadley could no longer ignore. Witnesses began coming forward with descriptions of a woman who had been seen in the company of both men in the days preceding their murders. Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, a prominent society matron, reported seeing Judge Thornton speaking intimately with a striking mulatto woman at a political reception on March 1st, describing her as possessing unusual green eyes and skin the color of honey, dressed in fashions that suggested considerable wealth and refinement. Similarly, 3 separate witnesses placed Edward Chambers dining with a woman matching the same description at the Peabody Hotel on March 14th, noting that she spoke with an educated accent and seemed to captivate the businessmen's complete attention throughout their meal. By March 20th, the Memphis Daily Appeal published a front-page warning that sent shockwaves through the city's elite. A dangerous woman of mixed race was believed to be targeting prominent citizens, gaining access to their homes through seduction and trust before executing them in their sleep, and all men of standing were advised to exercise extreme caution in their social engagements. To understand the full significance of these murders, one must grasp the powder keg that Memphis had become in the years following the Civil War. The city in 1872 existed in a state of barely controlled chaos, where federal troops maintained an uneasy occupation of key districts, while former Confederate officers and sympathizers controlled much of the local government and commerce. The Freedmen's Bureau struggled to protect newly emancipated people who faced constant intimidation, violence, and economic suppression from white residents determined to maintain the antebellum social order through terror rather than law. Into this volatile atmosphere, the Ku Klux Klan had emerged as the most visible and brutal instrument of white supremacist violence, conducting night raids against black families, burning homes and churches, lynching men accused of imaginary crimes, and driving Republican politicians from the state through systematic campaigns of assassination and fear. What the initial police investigations failed to mention, and what would only come to light through documents discovered in 1924, was that Colonel Whitmore, Judge Thornton, and Edward Chambers were not random victims but rather three of the most powerful organizers of Klan violence in West Tennessee. A sealed report compiled by federal investigator Captain Abraham Mitchell in June 1872, hidden in military archives for over 5 decades, revealed that all 7 eventual victims had been present at a particularly horrific event on the night of November 12, 1871. On that night, a group of approximately 30 Klansmen surrounded the New Hope Baptist Church in Fayette County, just east of Memphis, where a congregation of freed people had gathered for evening prayer. The raiders barred the doors from outside and set fire to the building, shooting anyone who attempted to escape through the windows. 17 people perished in the flames, including 6 children, while the Klansmen stood in a circle around the burning structure, their white robes illuminated by the inferno they had created. Captain Mitchell's report specifically identified all 7 Memphis victims as having participated in planning and executing this massacre, with Colonel Whitmore serving as the raid's commanding officer. The month of April brought 2 more deaths that shattered any remaining hope that the murders might cease. Captain Douglas Fairchild, a shipping magnate who controlled much of the riverboat commerce along the Mississippi, was discovered dead in his bedroom at the Gayoso House Hotel on April 9th. His throat opened by the same practiced hand that had claimed the previous victims. What made Fairchild's death particularly significant to investigators was that his mistress, a woman named Claire Devereaux who maintained apartments near the River District, came forward with detailed information about a woman she had encountered at Fairchild's side just 3 days before his murder. Miss Devereaux described the woman as possessing an almost aristocratic bearing, wearing a silk gown that must have cost more than most laborers earned in a year, speaking with the refined diction of someone educated in literature and music, and introducing herself as Celeste Moreau, recently arrived from New Orleans where her family had suffered financial reversals following the war. The description that Miss Devereaux provided matched perfectly with previous witness accounts: the striking green eyes, the light brown skin that allowed her to move between different social spheres, and most notably, a silver locket she wore on a delicate chain around her neck. 6 days later, on April 15th, Reverend Samuel Blackwood was found dead in the parsonage adjacent to First Methodist Church, where he had preached a theology that conveniently justified white supremacy as divine order. The discovery of his body might have added little to the investigation had it not been for a locked drawer in his church office that contained a personal diary spanning 3 years. The entry dated April 13th, written in Blackwood's cramped handwriting just 2 days before his death, described an encounter with a mysterious woman who had approached him after Sunday service, requesting a private audience to discuss matters of conscience. The diary noted that she possessed unsettling knowledge about his activities with the Klan, mentioning specific dates and locations of raids with an accuracy that terrified him. Yet she had assured him she sought only information about other Republican sympathizers in the area, offering intimacy in exchange for his cooperation. Memphis Police Chief William Hadley, a former Union officer who had remained in the city after the war, recognized by late April that he was hunting someone far more sophisticated than a common criminal. He assembled a special task force of 6 detectives, ordering them to canvass every hotel, boarding house, and social establishment in Memphis for information about the woman now known as Celeste Moreau. His private investigation notes, discovered in sealed city archives during a 1924 renovation of the municipal building, reveal a man who understood the political dimensions of the case far better than he dared express publicly. In his own handwriting, Chief Hadley wrote that he suspected the murders were systematic acts of revenge, targeting men who had committed atrocities against freed people, noting that each victim had been involved in Klan violence, yet their connections had been carefully concealed from official records. The task force's interviews yielded disturbing insights into how thoroughly the killer had prepared her campaign. Madame Josephine Leclerc, who operated a high-class establishment on Mulberry Street frequented by Memphis's elite, reported that a woman matching Celeste's description had visited her parlor on multiple occasions between October 1871 and January 1872, asking carefully worded questions about which gentlemen held influence in local politics, which were known to associate with certain fraternal organizations, and which might be amenable to the company of a sophisticated woman of color. Madame Leclerc noted that the woman paid generously for information and never once solicited clients herself, conducting herself with the bearing of someone conducting research rather than seeking employment. Even more revealing was testimony from a clerk at the Cosset Library, who remembered a light-skinned woman spending hours examining city directories, old newspaper archives, and property records throughout the winter months, taking meticulous notes in a leather journal she carried. The clerk recalled that she spoke with what he described as a cultured Louisiana accent and demonstrated knowledge of Memphis society that seemed encyclopedic, as though she had spent years studying the city's power structures, family connections, and social hierarchies before ever setting foot in Tennessee. The death of Major Thomas Rutledge on June 22, 1872, marked a significant escalation in the boldness of the killer's operations. Rutledge maintained a sprawling estate called Magnolia Heights, some 5 miles east of Memphis, where he continued to operate cotton fields worked by men and women who had technically been freed but remained bound to the land through debt, peonage, and lack of alternatives. The major, who had commanded a cavalry regiment during the war, was known throughout Shelby County as one of the primary financiers of Klan activities, using his considerable wealth to purchase weapons, horses, and the white robes that had become symbols of terror across the South. His body was discovered by his overseer on the morning of June 23rd, lying in the master bedroom of the Greek Revival mansion, with the now familiar wound across his throat, the bed linens saturated with blood that had long since dried. What distinguished this murder from the previous 5 was the wealth of witness testimony provided by the household staff, former enslaved people who had remained on the property after emancipation. A Freedmen's Bureau agent named Lieutenant James Morrison, who had been working to document labor abuses in the county, recorded detailed statements from 3 servants in the days following the discovery. The cook, a woman named Dinah Washington, reported that a finely dressed mulatto woman had arrived at the mansion around dusk on June 21st, arriving in a hired carriage that departed after depositing her at the front entrance. Major Rutledge had personally greeted the woman with evident pleasure, escorting her inside before dismissing the entire household staff for the evening, an unprecedented request that Dinah noted had never occurred in her 23 years at Magnolia Heights. The stable hand, Moses Freeman, added that he had observed the woman carrying a small leather satchel and wearing a distinctive silver locket that caught the fading sunlight as she ascended the front steps, her movements graceful and unhurried, as though she were a welcomed guest rather than a stranger entering the home of a man who would be dead within hours. 3 days after Major Rutledge's murder, a former enslaved woman named Martha Freeman presented herself at the Federal Army headquarters on Main Street, requesting an audience with the commanding officer. Martha, who had been freed in 1863 and now worked as a seamstress in the growing black community near Beale Street, carried information that she insisted would solve the murder case that had paralyzed Memphis society. Captain Abraham Mitchell, the same federal investigator who would later compile the sealed report about the New Hope Baptist Church massacre, conducted a lengthy interview with Martha that was transcribed by a military clerk and subsequently sealed in a file marked confidential, where it would remain untouched until its discovery in 1924. In her deposition, Martha explained that she had recognized the woman from the detailed descriptions circulating through both white and black communities, and that the killer was not Celeste Moreau but rather Celeste Bouchard, the daughter of Philippe Bouchard, a wealthy sugar planter from St. James Parish, Louisiana, and an enslaved woman named Marie, who had been Philippe's companion for over 2 decades. Martha had known the Bouchard family because her own sister had worked on their plantation until Philippe had freed both Marie and their children in 1860, providing them with a house in New Orleans and sufficient funds to live comfortably. What made Martha's testimony particularly chilling was her account of what had befallen the Bouchard family on November 8, 1871, just 4 days before the New Hope Church massacre. Klan riders from Memphis, traveling through Louisiana to spread their campaign of terror, had attacked the Bouchard home in New Orleans, dragging Marie and her 14-year-old son Jacques into the street and lynching them from a lamppost while Celeste, who had been visiting neighbors, returned to find their bodies still hanging. Martha recounted that Celeste had attended the funeral with a face like carved stone, speaking to no one, but that she had confided to Martha afterward that she knew the names of the men responsible, and that she would balance the scales of justice herself, no matter how long it required. Senator Richard Bainbridge, the most powerful and politically connected of all the victims, met his fate on August 17, 1872, in a manner that deviated significantly from the pattern established by the previous 6 murders. Bainbridge, who served in the Tennessee State Senate and wielded influence that extended to the governor's office and beyond, was discovered in his private study at his mansion on Poplar Avenue by his personal secretary on the morning of August 18th. Unlike the others who had died swiftly in their sleep, Bainbridge's body bore unmistakable evidence of prolonged suffering before death. His hands showed deep ligature marks where he had been bound to his desk chair. His face was swollen and bruised, and the wound across his throat appeared to have been inflicted only after hours of torment. What shocked investigating officers even more than the condition of the body was a handwritten note pinned to Bainbridge's chest with a silver hat pin, a note whose contents Chief Hadley immediately ordered sealed from public view. The official police report mentioned only that a document of unknown origin had been found at the scene, its contents deemed too sensitive for disclosure. However, among Chief Hadley's personal papers, discovered in 1924 when his estate was settled after his widow's death, investigators found a sealed envelope containing a precise copy of the note in the chief's own handwriting. The document was a meticulously compiled list of 17 names, dates, and locations, each entry corresponding to a victim of Klan violence across West Tennessee and northern Mississippi between 1868 and 1871. Beside each name was written the manner of death: burned alive in New Hope Baptist Church, lynched on River Road, shot while fleeing, drowned in Wolf River, and beside each entry were the initials of the Klansmen responsible. At the bottom of the list, written in an elegant hand that suggested both education and fury, were the words, Senator Richard Bainbridge, Grand Cyclops, Memphis Klan. Present at all 17 murders, August 17, 1872. Justice delayed but not denied. The discovery of Senator Bainbridge's tortured body ignited a firestorm of rage and panic throughout Memphis that transformed the city into a landscape of terror for its black and mixed-race population. Within hours of the news spreading, white citizens began organizing vigilante groups, arming themselves with rifles and pistols, and conducting their own searches for any woman who remotely matched the descriptions of Celeste Bouchard. The Memphis Daily Appeal published inflammatory editorials calling for immediate action against what they termed the mulatto menace, demanding that authorities conduct house-to-house searches and questioning of all women of color who could not provide ironclad documentation of their whereabouts during each of the 7 murders. Between August 18th and August 31st, over 3 dozen innocent women were dragged from their homes, detained in makeshift holding cells, subjected to brutal interrogations, and in at least 4 documented cases, lynched by mobs who required no evidence beyond skin color and gender to dispense their version of justice. Federal troops under the command of Colonel Henry Warner were forced to establish checkpoints throughout the city to prevent further violence, posting armed guards at black churches and community centers, while attempting to restore some semblance of order to streets that had descended into chaos. The Commercial Appeal reported on August 24th that Memphis had become a city under siege, where women of color refused to venture outside their homes even for necessities, where businesses in black neighborhoods shuttered their doors, and where the threat of mob violence hung over the city like the oppressive heat that rose from the river each afternoon. Yet despite the massive manhunt, the deployment of federal resources, the interrogation of hundreds of witnesses, and the systematic terror inflicted upon innocent people, Celeste Bouchard herself remained utterly elusive, as though she had vanished into the humid air that hung over the Mississippi Delta, leaving behind only the bodies of 7 men and a city consumed by its own violent fury. By early September, as the violence in Memphis began to subside from exhaustion rather than resolution, investigators found themselves confronting a troubling reality that Celeste Bouchard had completely disappeared, leaving behind almost no physical trace of her months-long presence in the city. The last confirmed sighting came from a dock worker named Thomas Wright, who reported seeing a woman matching her description boarding the steamboat Belle of Memphis on the morning of August 19th, just 2 days after Senator Bainbridge's murder, carrying only a small valise and wearing a simple traveling dress that contrasted sharply with the elegant gowns witnesses had described throughout her campaign. Wright recalled that she had purchased a ticket to New Orleans under the name Mrs. Catherine Devereaux, presenting herself as a widow returning home after visiting relatives. However, when authorities in New Orleans were contacted and asked to examine passenger manifests and conduct searches, no record could be found of anyone by that name or any of the known aliases Celeste had used arriving in Louisiana. The only significant evidence of her existence surfaced on September 12th when the proprietress of Mrs. Kelly's boarding house on Monroe Avenue reported that a trunk had been abandoned in a room rented under the name Miss Marie Thornton 3 months prior. The trunk's contents provided a disturbing glimpse into the methodical nature of Celeste's operation. It contained 6 expensive dresses of different styles and colors, 3 wigs ranging from dark brown to auburn, an extensive collection of theatrical makeup and false jewelry, and most significantly, a folder containing newspaper clippings about each of the 7 victims, their obituaries, their business dealings, and articles detailing their prominence in Memphis society. The most mysterious item was a leather-bound journal filled with pages of text written in an elaborate cipher that resisted all attempts at decoding by both police cryptographers and federal intelligence officers. After 2 weeks of failed attempts to break the code, Governor John Brown issued a confidential order that the journal and all associated evidence be sealed and removed from active investigation. The materials disappeared into state archives, where they would remain untouched for over half a century. As autumn settled over Memphis, a different kind of conspiracy began to take shape in the offices of Tennessee's political establishment, one designed not to catch a killer but to bury the truth about why 7 prominent men had been murdered. The families of the deceased, all wielding considerable wealth and political influence, began exerting pressure on state officials to cease public discussion of the case, arguing that continued coverage was damaging their reputations and business interests. A memorandum discovered in 1924 among the papers of Tennessee Attorney General Horace Maynard, dated October 14, 1872, revealed the extent of this coordinated suppression effort. The document, marked confidential and addressed to Memphis officials, prosecutors, and police leadership, explicitly instructed recipients to minimize public discussion of the murders, stating that further investigation would only serve to inflame racial tensions and damage the reputations of the deceased gentlemen, whose service to Tennessee and the Confederacy deserved to be remembered with honor rather than associated with scandal. The memorandum suggested that all parties would benefit from allowing the matter to fade quietly from public consciousness. In the weeks that followed, the machinery of official concealment moved into operation with remarkable efficiency. Police reports that had mentioned Klan activities or the New Hope Baptist Church massacre were revised to remove such references, with new versions filed that described the victims simply as prominent citizens. Witness testimonies that provided too much detail about the victims' activities or Celeste's accusations disappeared from evidence rooms, with clerks claiming the documents had been misfiled or lost. Newspaper editors across Memphis received visits from influential businessmen and politicians who suggested that continued coverage of the murders was not in the community's best interests. By November, the Memphis Daily Appeal, which had published front-page stories about the killings throughout the summer, referred to the events only obliquely as the unfortunate incidents of last winter, treating them as though they were distant history rather than crimes that remained unsolved. In the vacuum created by official silence, Memphis became a city consumed by speculation and rumor, where the absence of facts allowed imagination and prejudice to construct competing narratives about the woman who had killed 7 powerful men and vanished without trace. Among certain white circles, particularly those with roots in the old Creole communities, whispers spread that Celeste Bouchard was a voodoo priestess who had traveled upriver from New Orleans with dark powers learned from the practitioners of that mysterious faith, using supernatural abilities to cloud men's minds and render them helpless before her blade. These theories, published in sensationalist pamphlets sold on street corners, described elaborate rituals involving cursed objects and spirit possession, transforming a calculated campaign of revenge into something from Gothic fiction. Other segments of white society, particularly those who maintained connections to northern business interests, insisted that Celeste must have been an agent of radical abolitionists, a trained assassin sent by vengeful Republicans to destabilize Southern leadership and punish former Confederates for their resistance to Reconstruction. This narrative found particular favor among those seeking to justify continued violence against black political organizing, as it allowed them to frame the murders as evidence of a broader Northern conspiracy, rather than the consequences of their own brutality. Within the black community, however, a different interpretation took hold, spoken in hushed voices in churches and gathering places where federal troops could not overhear. Here, Celeste Bouchard was discussed not as a criminal or supernatural entity, but as an avenging angel, a righteous instrument of divine justice who had done what law and government refused to do, holding murderers accountable for their crimes against innocent people. This interpretation found its most explicit expression in March 1873, when a radical Republican newspaper called The Freedman's Voice published a pamphlet titled Justice Beyond Law: The Executions of 1,872, which argued that the 7 dead men were war criminals whose actions merited death under any moral framework, and that Celeste Bouchard, if that was indeed her name, had simply carried out sentences that Southern courts would never impose. The truth about the Memphis murders of 1,872 remained buried in sealed archives for 52 years, until a chance discovery by a graduate student changed everything. In the spring of 1924, a young scholar named Thomas Whitfield was conducting dissertation research on Reconstruction-era violence at the Tennessee State Archives in Nashville, when he noticed a discrepancy in the cataloging system. Several boxes from 1,872, marked as containing routine police correspondence, had been misfiled in a section reserved for sealed gubernatorial records. Upon requesting access and explaining the apparent error to the archivist, Whitfield was surprised to find that the boxes required special permission to open, a restriction that immediately aroused his curiosity. After 3 weeks of bureaucratic negotiation, he finally gained access to what would prove to be the most comprehensive collection of evidence about the Black Widow case ever assembled. The cache contained Chief Hadley's complete private investigation notes, including his observations about the political nature of the murders that had never appeared in official reports. It included Martha Freeman's full deposition identifying Celeste Bouchard and detailing the murder of her mother and brother. Most dramatically, it contained the actual note found on Senator Bainbridge's body, with its list of 17 Klan victims and the initials of their killers. The most remarkable discovery was a folder containing both Celeste's cipher journal and a partial translation completed by a military cryptographer in October 1872. A translation that had apparently been so disturbing to officials that they had ordered the entire investigation sealed. The translated portions, covering approximately 30 pages of the journal, revealed a mind of extraordinary intelligence and discipline. The entries began in December 1870, more than a year before the first murder, and documented a systematic campaign of preparation that included studying prominent Memphis families, learning the social customs and expectations of Southern society, acquiring the clothing and mannerisms necessary to move through elite circles, and identifying the men responsible for her family's destruction with methodical precision that suggested both exceptional intellect and unwavering purpose. The translated journal entries provided a window into a life marked by both privilege and profound vulnerability, revealing the complex circumstances that had shaped Celeste Bouchard into an instrument of vengeance. She had been born in 1845 on the Bouchard plantation in St. James Parish, Louisiana, the daughter of Philippe Bouchard, a prosperous sugar planter, and Marie, an enslaved woman who had been his companion for many years before Celeste's birth. The journal described how Marie, who had herself been educated by a previous owner's daughter, had secretly taught Celeste to read and write from an early age, conducting lessons in their quarters after the day's work was complete. As Celeste grew older, Philippe had arranged for tutors to continue her education discreetly, providing her with instruction in literature, mathematics, French, and music, an education that far exceeded what most white women of the era received. By the time Philippe formally freed Celeste in 1860, granting her papers that declared her a free woman of color, she possessed the refined manners, educated speech, and cultural knowledge that would later allow her to move through different social spheres with ease. The journal's most harrowing entries described the events of November 8, 1871, in stark, unflinching prose that suggested the author had relived these moments countless times. Celeste had been visiting a neighbor that evening when approximately 20 Klan riders surrounded the Bouchard home in New Orleans, where Marie and 14-year-old Jacques, Celeste's half-brother, were preparing supper. The riders dragged both from the house into the street, where Philippe, returning from business in the city, was forced at gunpoint to witness as they hanged Marie and Jacques from a lamppost, the white-robed men laughing and jeering as mother and son struggled and died. Philippe had reportedly begged for mercy, offering money, property, anything to spare his family, but the raiders had beaten him severely and warned him that any further assistance to freed people would result in his own death, before riding away into the darkness and leaving the bodies swaying in the night air. The discoveries made by Thomas Whitfield in 1924 answered many questions about the Memphis murders of 1872. Yet the ultimate fate of Celeste Bouchard herself remains one of history's most persistent mysteries, a ghost story without an ending that continues to haunt the historical record. Despite extensive research conducted by Whitfield and subsequent historians over the following decades, no verified record of Celeste's life after August 1872 has ever been found. Some scholars have theorized that she fled to Europe, perhaps to France, where her education and ability to speak fluent French would have allowed her to blend into society, living out her days under an assumed identity in Paris or Lyon. Others have suggested she remained in America but moved westward, perhaps to California or the territories, where rapid population growth and limited record-keeping would have made disappearance relatively simple for someone with her intelligence and resourcefulness. The most intriguing theory, however, emerged from research conducted in the 1930 seconds, when historians began noticing a pattern of unsolved murders targeting known Klan members in cities across the South between 1872 and 1875. In Atlanta, New Orleans, Charleston, and Richmond, prominent white supremacists were found dead in circumstances that bore striking similarities to the Memphis killings. Victims discovered with their throats cut, no signs of struggle, and occasional reports of mysterious women seen in their company shortly before death. While no definitive evidence connects these murders to Celeste Bouchard, the timing and methodology suggest possibilities that have never been fully explored. The journal's final translated entry, dated August 18, 1872, the day after Senator Bainbridge's murder, consisted of only a single chilling sentence written in Celeste's precise hand. 7 debts paid. The accounts are not yet balanced. There are others. The remainder of the journal, approximately 100 pages, has never been successfully decoded despite attempts by cryptographers over multiple decades. Most mysteriously, the original journal itself disappeared from the Tennessee State Archives sometime in 1931, with no record of who removed it or where it might have gone, leaving Celeste Bouchard's story forever incomplete.